How's everyone doing?
Good.
Cool.
I love the energy in the room. We're going to improve it even more, but it's a good start. First, some housekeeping. Hopefully you're here to hear about the world of ADHD and neurodiversity. Our aim is that you come away feeling better, feeling more knowledgeable about these terms, why they matter, and so that you can support your colleagues better, actually regardless of whether they have a neurodivergency or not. Quick check, can everyone hear me?
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay. Can everyone see the slides? Slide, singular. Great. Okay. If you can't, don't worry too much. This isn't a slide-heavy presentation. Not after the first 37, anyway. At the end, we'll also share a link so you can immediately download the slides straight away, and they'll be available on the Whovia app at some point in the next few days. If there's anything significant that doesn't make sense, do let us know straight away. But otherwise, I'm going to ask that you keep questions to the end because we've got a lot of information to cover. And, well, some of us tend to go a bit off topic. Which we'll come on to that. As a sneak peek, if you've got questions, I tend to write this down on my phone on a note-taking app so that I don't forget about them later on. And that's how I get them out of my system somewhere else. I know I haven't forgotten them. Okay. Let's hopefully... Yes. Go to the next slide. Okay, this is our agenda. You're going to hear about red stars, 3 stories, a bit of science, and hopefully some future considerations you can put into practice. I'll be reading from my notes, due to the way my memory works. Roger will be doing his own thing, which is literally rearranging the furniture. There is a seat there if anyone wants to be... If anyone wants a seat, there is now a seat there. But if we've done our job correctly, it shouldn't infringe on your own experience. Roger might even want to see at this point. Anyway, you might even spot that even from the start, although there are similarities in the conditions we'll cover, no one-size-fits-all approach is going to work here. Cool. Right. So hopefully... Yes. Right. So I'm Paul. I'm an enabler and facilitator. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for 13 years. Mainly as an independent consultant for non-profits and for small businesses. 3 years ago, I discovered I had ADHD. It's just taken me 40 plus years. And I'm currently in training to become an ADHD coach.
And I'm Roger. I started working with Salesforce in 2010, and I've worked with end users and in consultancies ever since on projects across a wide range of industries, clouds, and countries. Last year, I discovered I was autistic, and this has really been a voyage of self-discovery and self-exploration, and also explains my need to correct lots of small things and tidy them as I go. So I'm a very tidying kind of person. First of all, we want to do a little exercise with you. It's not going to tell you whether or not you are neurodivergent, but hopefully it will provide you with some insight about how the brain works, all in under about 2 minutes. Okay, if you're comfortable doing so, can I ask you to close your eyes? With your eyes closed, imagine a 5-pointed red star on a black background. Great. With your eyes still closed, just keep thinking about that 5-pointed red star on a black background. I want you to really focus on it. Okay, please open your eyes. We haven't got a lot of time, but if you have your mobile phone to hand and it has a signal, or if you're connected to the Wi-Fi, please go to slido.com. Very subtly written across the bottom of the slide. And pop in our survey number, which is 115745 We'll give you about 30 seconds to do that.
I see people doing it. I have advanced notification. So yeah, go awesome. To. I'm interrupting Roger's script. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a script so that I don't steal his parts.
Didn't say anything about the other way around.
Okay, how are we doing?
Oh shit, I wasn't timing. Yes, preparation. Cool. Okay, is everyone feeling comfortable? We'll give you 10 more seconds. So you go to slido.com, put in that number, and then you put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 for the star for the image that most matches what you see on your screen. Okay.
So number 1 is that there is no visualization, that you just don't, you're not a visual person. Through to 6, which is that you're a highly visual person.
Okay, I have 35 results in.
That's pretty good.
5, 4, 3, can't be asked. Let's go for it. Right, okay, so. Oh, that'll do.
That's our best result to date, which is pretty good.
Cool.
So, at this point, you're probably thinking that these stars are a really easy thing to visualize. Surely everyone is thinking the same. But, these kind of variations tend to typically be represented. Normally, we would expect there to be a bell curve around 3 or 4, but not today. But we have got a good spread, which is great. What this shows is that whilst we all look fairly similar on the outside, people's internal experiences vary, very different. It all highlights how we think differently. This is neurodiversity, but not necessarily neurodivergency. We're going to come back to those definitions later. For what it's worth, I see things like this.
Okay. Speaking of things differently, you may have noticed I'm fairly male. So let me introduce Florence van der Balk, who's helped create our presentation today. Florence is based in Belgium, but scheduling means she's currently on holiday in Canada. So I applaud her for her priorities and boundaries and thank her for her trust in our teamwork. Hold on, and let me put the right slide up.
Oh, I think you're a couple behind.
There we go.
Awesome.
Florence is 27 years young and a functional analyst at Capgemini. She's also a psychologist with a special interest in technology and the underwater world. Today I present her childhood story. We wanted to be honest and show you how ADHD can first present. And at this point, we are deliberately choosing not to explain what ADHD is. We'll come on to that straight after though. Between the ages of 6 and 12, Florence wasn't doing so well at school. Academically, she was doing okay, but the reason for that was that she was studying more than her friends to achieve the same results. This meant that she had much less spare time. Her parents were supporting her more intensely far later in life than would be usual. The friends she did have looked at her oddly, and she was bullied. This is really common, as kids pick on differences, which is the whole thing about neurodivergency, as we are divergent from the normal. I think they learn that behaviour through society. As adults, we are still guilty of doing this and need to be more aware of it. Because awareness, we can then help shape our own habits. By the age of 12, Florence had taken to hiding, particularly from bullies, and her self-confidence was taking a hit. She also felt emotions really intensely. Only later in life would Florence come to understand that this is typical of both ADHD and autism, both as a good and a bad thing. But she was enjoying the academic side, and she knew that she had the capability. Florence's teachers were saying that if she wanted to continue studying at a mainstream school, she would struggle. This was despite the fact that academically, she was just about keeping up. People may have been put off by Florence's talkativeness, but this shouldn't have denied her the chance to go to a decent school. Like, really shouldn't. She did stay on in a mainstream school, however, and she studied Latin, an opportunity that wouldn't have otherwise been presented. As part of her teacher's help, she was also repeatedly told that maths wasn't right for her, but she went on to score the second highest results in her class. Hyper-focus on a topic of interest really helped here. Disappointingly, those high scores, well, the teacher concerned never congratulated her on them. It appeared the teacher had an issue with being proved wrong. If Florence had listened to that teacher, she may well have not made it into the Salesforce ecosystem. Florence was stubborn, but not everyone manages it. This angers us. Oh, I think I'm done with that one. There's good news though. By the age of 15, Florence's sister had been identified as having a concentration disorder. As Florence had similarities, she went off and got a diagnosis of ADHD. This led her onto a path of self-understanding and self-acceptance. As Florence will happily confess, she probably works a third slower than others and does have a fast-shifting focus due to her hyperactivity. This can be really useful in absorbing a lot of different data points. which brings in different considerations than would otherwise be the case. She also happens to have a high IQ, so if the working environment is right, this much more than balances out. Medication helps, but also so do minor, really easy accommodations. For instance, when it comes to exams, those lovely Salesforce certifications, rooms with 30 plus people can have too much bustle in them. Don't know how it should be pleased about today. They're too, well, I hope should be pleased. Anyway, they're too busy and have too much energy. But rooms with 5 or 10 people are fine. Extra time is also nice. Florence doesn't normally need it, but it gives her a calming reassurance. Back in the office, or perhaps if she was here today, if there's a meeting or presentation with a large number of people, she now comes in 5 minutes early and picks a place which is never in the front row. This means that far fewer people pass her directly by, leaving Florence with the personal space she needs. And she doodles. It doesn't affect the quality of her work, but as you can see, she simply redirects the extra energy rather nicely that would have otherwise got in the way. At other times, this ADHD-inspired creativity can find itself in solutions to Salesforce projects. One issue that Florence experiences is that if a piece of work needs to get repeated or redone, she always wants an explanation why. She would encourage you to listen to the questions she is asking, active listening as it is known, as there is always a reason. She needs the extra information to open up new pathways in her brain, and this helps her come up with better solutions. On the other side of the coin, this tends to open up the other person's pathways too, so that they can learn to better articulate and think through their original request. There's a lot more to love and say about Florence. Hopefully you'll hear her presence throughout the rest of the talk. And it's also worth noting, and this is by joyful coincidence, that Tok Ahmed has a session on active listening in this very room after our session. And it means you're likely to get a seat. And there he's waving, I believe. But why haven't I explained what ADHD is? We wanted to deliberately leave you without all the information, because that's the experience that many of us go through, particularly those who get a diagnosis later in life. FOG, a certain amount of coping strategies, realization, and then much more success as we work out how to work with our differences rather than against them. Over to Roger. He's going to explain everything.
We'll give it a go. Hello, brain. So, you're here to learn about ADHD and how this fits into the workplace. But first, we want to paint a broader picture so that we're all on the same page, especially as the science around this area is rapidly developing. There are marked differences between neurotypical and neurodivergent brains, which is important because sometimes people say everyone's a little bit autistic or ADHD, which isn't the case because these are genetic differences and medically diagnosable. Genetically, some brains are formed differently from typical brains in terms of structure, function, and development. That's the divergence, where there are significant and pervasive differences from the majority of the population. Some parts of the brain are larger, while others are smaller, and the connections and the way they communicate are different. Even the wiring and the rate of growth is atypical. For a certain number of people, these are called neurodivergent brains. It also means that neurodivergency cannot be changed any more than I can permanently change my eye or hair colour. It's worth noting that some children find their symptoms get easier as they develop from childhood to adulthood, and they may even dip below the clinical threshold, but that's not the case for all of us. Neurodivergency typically includes autism, gifted or high IQ, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and Tourette's. There are other definitions, though. We're now going to focus on just two of these, ADHD and autism. ADHD is really two different issues which co-occur, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, although I hate the word disorder. That's come about because scientists prefer an ordered world. They are quite autistic about it, in fact. ADHD can make people dreamy or impulsive. There are other characteristics such as time blindness, but it's important to note that these are not guaranteed. Everyone is different. Some traits cancel each other out. Some reinforce each other for better and for worse. So what is autism? Also known as autistic spectrum disorder. Officially, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder marked by restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviour and deficits in reciprocal social communication. The spectrum part of this, highlighting that this can show itself in many ways and in different levels of intensity. For me, breakfast is always at 11. It has to be at 11 because that's when my breakfast occurs. And by 10:30, I will be starving and ready for 10:30, ready for 11. And everyone at home knows when I've forgotten to have it at that time. With ADHD and autism, many symptoms overlap. For instance, Paul and I both have autism. We're both intense. But Paul prefers Doctor Who, and I prefer archery, with really deadly bows. So if anyone asks you for feedback, tell them it's been a really great session. We also both have trouble keeping track of conversations. Paul's attention slips, and I have language processing difficulties. So it can take me a while to understand what I've heard. We both have the same difficulty, but in this case, for different reasons. However, we do both share a keen sense of social justice and fight against inequalities. Often, someone with one neurodivergent condition has more than one neurodivergent condition. For instance, ADHD with dyslexia or autism with dyspraxia. It's like an online supermarket shop. You've selected one thing, but there's a likelihood that someone has done a swap or even added a few extra items in the basket that you hadn't selected. For neurotypical people, their pattern of development and skill acquisition is well known. For neurodivergent people, it's spiky. Some skills and behaviours will be gained at a higher than expected level or more quickly, whilst other abilities may be delayed or less developed. There is also a little bit more information at the end of this slide deck, should you need some. I've mentioned neurotypical and neurodivergent. Let's pull back and explain where neurodiversity fits in. Everyone is neurodiverse. If you're thinking of a Venn diagram, that's the box. Within the box, we've got two groups, neurodivergent and neurotypical, which don't overlap, as shown here. Within neurodivergent, you've got all the conditions we've been talking about, ADHD, autism, etc. Around 20% of the population have a neurodivergent condition. Some know they have it, but many do not. For instance, it used to be thought that women and girls couldn't get ADHD simply because the studies had been performed by white middle-class men on white middle-class boys, which leads to serious disparities in the research. A study in 2021 found that over the prior 77 years, nearly 100 years, only 3 studies had been undertaken that centred on black autistic girls and women. Men are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed, with all the impact that has on everyone's awareness and support. To put this in context, let's say there's 1,000 people at London's Calling. That means that there's probably around at least 200 people here with at least one neurodivergent condition. Thank you, Paul.
Sorry.
Or a little higher, because the tech world is often very suitable for people with our associated collection of traits.
Cool. So I was bad introduction.
Very nice.
You're so wonderful.
Thank
Should I take over now properly?
Yes, you
Okay,
can go for it.
that's the science done. Oh, I also showed the slides as well. There you go. Yay. This is really warm. But yeah. But hold on before I get into this, because otherwise you don't want me to faint on stage, because that'll be memorable.
Not helpful, but memorable.
Sorry. Okay, so that's the science done. I've been allowed to return. I'm going to be telling my own story, but first I thought it would be useful to talk about my golden hoodie, which I was awarded back in 2018 before I knew I had ADHD. I was awarded it mainly for my contribution to help building up the Dutch Salesforce community. Golden hoodies are very rare, and the sound of 4,000 people clapping and even cheering as I received it proved to me that I was appreciated and had done something right. The point being that neurodivergency absolutely has its challenges, but doesn't necessarily have to stop people achieving things. Thank you. And now for an example of the way my neurodivergency was put into use earlier this year. My boss walked into a room and said, "We're not reacting to priority maintenance jobs as quickly as we should be. I want an email to go out to all the maintenance managers when a priority job is logged on Salesforce to ensure that it is picked up as quickly as possible." The background is that working in the maintenance department of a large housing association, it's not realistic for managers to be seated at their screens looking at Salesforce all the time, jabbing the refresh button. With this in mind, the manager's requirement appeared fair on first reflection. Also, that manager was senior, so no one dared question them. In walks our hero, Paul. Paul has certain autistic and ADHD qualities, a keen sense of justice and the need to understand why he is doing something, rather than just getting on with it. He's fearless, literally has no fears, due to some impulsive tendencies, which means that he's not afraid to challenge convention. This is both a good and a bad thing, because it means that he, or I, will ask the boss for more information, regardless of whether or not the boss is busy, or even likes being questioned. Apparently, some people don't like being challenged on requirements, and want their way followed by speed or ego reasons. That's not my problem. I'm going to ask anyway. So, I asked the boss why this requirement was needed now. It turns out that staff weren't phoning their managers when logging priority jobs, which they should have been doing. I came to understand that these are the sorts of jobs where there is an imminent threat to health and safety. Also, the staff were cheating, which I quite admired them for, by mislogging standard jobs as priority jobs to get them done quicker. Instead, I suggested we added a conditional pick list, which would only appear for priority jobs. Combined with a validation rule, it allowed the jobs to be saved only if the member of staff could answer yes to both of the following two questions. Is this an imminent threat to health and safety? And has a manager been called? We implemented this and the quality of the ticket logging was improved. The speed of response to priority jobs guaranteed, and email spamming to the whole team, rather than just the single person that needed it, was prevented. Fundamentally, it's actually a training issue. But we live in the real world, and this real world has one flow less, staff more on the ball, and a more accurate logging of jobs. So, I'm direct, I'm blunt, and I save the organisation time. As with many ADHDers, on many occasions I've been the canary in the coal mine, the first person to highlight problems. Other qualities I have are tenaciousness and hyperfocus. This doesn't mean that it is stress-free for me, but for better or worse, often with an idea, I don't give up until I see it through. One quick word. On my opening slide, it listed various neurobiological differences I have from the majority of the population. It's worth saying that I claim and own these labels, but for me, they are just that. They are effectively search engine terms which I use as a quick start to help me find the tools that I am likely to find useful. Nothing more and nothing less, as they still don't define who I am. So, you've heard Florence's and my very different stories. As Roger's story will also demonstrate, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met just one neurodivergent person, even if we have the same labels. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you. So, I was diagnosed last year at the age of 45. So, definitely not as a child, or even as a young adult. And since then, I've spent a lot of time learning about autism, and through that, understanding more about myself. I've had some really good chats with and guidance from other neurodivergent people, like Paul. In fact, I approached Paul because I was having a problem and I wanted to get some input from a more experienced neurodivergent person. There had been some consistent feedback about my communication style, in that I was both quiet, good thing I've got the mic, and in terms of volume, and how I was contributing to meetings. And I wasn't asking very many questions. I'd heard that Paul was outstanding at outlining his communication requirements. And he was also neurodivergent. So I really wanted his input. I'd sought tips from other neurotypical people, but they weren't really working for me. When we looked at my feedback through an autistic lens, it added new dimension and context. Examples include that I now recognise that my language processing is slow, especially if there is any additional noise And this means that it takes me extra time to understand the information being discussed, and it can take me longer to find questions I need to ask. Additionally, my difficulties with social cues means that I'm just not sure when to actually ask a question. My volume is low and even when presenting, because I have really sensitive hearing. So at the moment, I'm suffering slightly because I can hear myself so loudly. And I sound really loud, which I do at the moment especially. These are things I just can't change. I've been trying, but fundamentally, they're part of my genetics. So now, I had my diagnosis. I understood myself a bit better, and the way that people perceive me better. I wanted to find a way to make life easier, both for myself and for the people I work with. So Paul suggested a personal operating manual, sometimes called a passport, which is gaining traction in the business world. For me, it's a one-page PowerPoint to explain what would help and how to manage expectations and make communicating my difficulties easier. Hello, PowerPoint. There we go. I opted for the PowerPoint because it's an easy way to share the information consistently. And that gave me a reliable way to open a focused conversation. A few people have said that they wish every team member had a similar sheet. It illustrates how I don't follow conventions, which is one of my autistic qualities, and why I am sometimes called in to save projects. So far, it's going well. The PowerPoint has been well received and started some conversations, as well as providing ways to improve how effective I am and reduce the difficulties that I face. I didn't include my diagnosis on the sheet because that isn't the focus for my colleagues. Instead, I've explained how I will appear in certain environments and tried to add some actions that will help. Here is part of my PowerPoint, a bit larger, so you can read it more easily. I miss hints. You may think you've given me a hint, but it will literally fly straight over my head, and I won't get it. I won't even notice it, even slightly. Be direct with me about what you want, because I miss assumptions. And discuss deadlines with me so that I understand them and how important they are. If there is something that is said in an emotional or sarcastic way, please explain in more depth. It's likely I will miss this, and possibly even miss the underlying sort of meanings. And here is a little summary of the thinking process I went through to create the PowerPoint. We started with my diagnosis, which was the straightforward part, because that's relatively medical and easy to get. Then I started looking at the feedback I'd been receiving and looking for areas that were consistent and matched with my diagnosis. Then I started to look at how I could make my own life easier and how this should be communicated. How's it going? This is a loop review process. We use them all the way through system development and update this so I can monitor and update the document. As autism is a dynamic disability, the traits can change and change in intensity. So monitoring the document is really important.
Cool. Thank you, Roger. Getting into the home run, but we're going to go interactive for a moment. We've still got time just. We've got one more exercise for you, and well done for everyone because it's very warm, so thank you for not... Well, if you have fainted, don't worry, I'll wake you up at the end.
If you have fainted, please do it quietly.
Cool. Neurodivergent people, so that's us who have ADHD, autism, or many of the other things starting with this, don't think like the majority. This gives us a different perspective, insights, and ways of doing things. These can all have benefits for your business or your organizations. Can you now, for 1 minute, which I'm going to time, take a moment to think of a time when someone with a different perspective, whether caused by neurodivergency or not, has benefited a project that you are working on? So a bit of quiet. It's actually 30 seconds while we think about that. Details are on the slide. 30 seconds.
And follow up might be question how should we do it?
30 seconds. That's your exercise. We'll go forward after that. Some of you were cheating and getting ahead of me. Okay. In two ways, suggestions and also even discussing it, which is absolutely beautiful. So now I'm going to give you, I think it's 3 minutes to talk to your neighbour. Not yet. You're in a safe place with quite a few people interested in this topic. So shortly, Roger and I would like you to turn to your neighbour, ideally someone you haven't spoken to yet today, and introduce yourself. Then share a moment of when you were working with someone with a different perspective has benefited a project you were working on. So your time starts. Oh, probably not. Now. Okay, folks. I'm back in the room. Thank you, you beautiful people. Cool. Example that we're all human, and I'm really embarrassed and annoyed with myself about this, but I'm not going to kill myself over it. There's one extra line that I should have read out, which said, if you don't want to do that for whatever reason, you can also catch up on your emails or continue quietly contemplating. So I'm really sorry for anyone in the room. But this is an example of us, like, we can try with the best intentions, doesn't always work out. So we need to be respectful that life is not perfect. Right, let's see what else we've got. Okay, so on to the takeaways and final thoughts wrap-up territory. Hopefully you've come away today with a better understanding of not just what it means to be ADHD and or autistic, but to actually live with these conditions. That's part of us, but doesn't define us. If you think that someone is struggling, regardless of the reason, the very best tip I can give you is simply to bear in mind that everyone is different. So ask. What help can I give? Would any extra support or accommodations help you? That opens up the question. It is definitely not for you to be a doctor and define what someone else's medical needs are, or anything like that. Okay, so we've now put, we've now put some particularly common adjustments on this slide. For instance, sending meeting agendas in advance, clear direct communication, offering flexible hours and work locations, making distraction-free environments and quiet spaces available for those that want. Worth noting that some people actually prefer music playing on their headphones. So what can work for some people can actually be the opposite of working for other people. Accept stimming, that's fidgeting or repetitive movements, not always requiring the camera on during online meetings. Our only question is, who wouldn't benefit from these shifts? Perhaps some of this has resonated with you directly today. If you want to know more, particularly about ADHD, we've listed some organisations and resources that will help on the screen. The UK is behind the US in terms of neurodiversity awareness, but there are still some useful in-person groups, podcasts and websites out there. What's the Q? I was doing so well. The QR code on the screen will lead you to this set of slides. We've got 2.5 minutes. I'm going to say we've not really got time for questions because we'll clear them and let the next people in. But we will be. We've got one person's going for it. Go for your one question. And we've not got time to deal with it. It's a nuanced question. We've got maybe Roger's.
Absolutely. Grab me afterwards, please.
We'll really happily have the conversation. So we will be outside for questions for the whole of the next session, or as long as anyone wants, or not. But can we just take a moment to thank you all for giving your time to come and hear us. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. The London's Calling team for selecting us, because it's not. They thought it was part of their schedule, but they really didn't have to. So we're really great. Our hidden panel of neurodiverse people who listened to this presentation for strengthening it. And of course, the sponsors who today wouldn't have been possible without.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
And if someone can take a photo of me and Roger. So we're finished, but just want one quick photo of me and Roger in front of us.
Yeah, we're after a photo opportunity now.
No. How many slides?
There's at least 40 of them, wasn't there? Or something?
Come on. Who's going to take...
It's spam now.
Can someone grab a photo?
They're going to kill us.
Yay. Oh, I don't know where to look now. Technical issue. Emma, can you just take a photo? Sorry, the one person without a camera. Cool, and then we'll exit and let...
Then we'll let everyone escape.
Yay.
Thank you very much.